January 17th, 1991. In the early hours of the morning, while most of the world slept, the United States of America did something no nation had ever done before. Without announcing its presence, without triggering a single radar alarm, without giving its enemy even 1 second to react, the US military reached into the heart of a foreign capital and dismantled its defenses as if they did not exist. There were no warning sirens, no incoming blips, no visible aircraft in the sky. From the perspective of the most advanced air defense systems on Earth, nothing was happening at all. And yet, command centers were exploding, power grids were collapsing, and the backbone of an entire nation's military was being erased with absolute precision. This was not just a victory, it was a demonstration of dominance so complete that the enemy could not even understand what was killing them. For decades, the Soviet Union had built its power on one unshakable belief, that no attack could ever arrive unseen. Their radars, their missiles, their doctrines, their entire vision of global security rested on the idea that technology would always provide warning, and warning would always provide time. Time to respond, time to retaliate, time to survive. That belief had shaped the Cold War, kept nuclear weapons in their silos, and maintained a fragile balance between superpowers. But on this night, in a matter of minutes, that belief collapsed. Somewhere above the darkened city of Baghdad, American aircraft were moving freely through airspace that was supposed to be sealed, guarded, impenetrable. The most sophisticated Soviet-designed defenses ever exported were alive, powered, and watching. And they were seeing absolutely nothing. What made this moment truly terrifying for America's rivals was not the explosions themselves. It was the silence that preceded them. No radar tracks, no electronic noise, no signs of intrusion. The systems were working perfectly, reporting exactly what they detected, an empty sky. And yet, from that empty sky, the United States was striking with the precision of a surgeon and the confidence of a nation that knew it had crossed a technological boundary no one else had reached. This was not brute force. This was not overwhelming numbers. This was intelligence, engineering, and foresight weaponized into something entirely new. A form of warfare so advanced that it made decades of enemy planning instantly obsolete. In command rooms, thousands of miles away, men trained to analyze threats and calculate responses were confronted with an impossible question. How do you defend against an enemy you cannot see, cannot track, and cannot even confirm exists? Every assumption they had trusted, every equation they had relied on, every doctrine they had rehearsed for a lifetime suddenly meant nothing. The United States had not simply found a weakness in their defenses, it had rendered the entire concept of defense meaningless. And as reports began to circulate through military and intelligence circles, one realization spread faster than panic ever could. This was not just a battlefield success. This was a message that the rules of war had changed, and that America was now operating on a level of technology and strategy the rest of the world was not prepared to confront. What happened that night would send shockwaves through the collapsing Soviet system, ignite fear inside command bunkers built to survive nuclear war, and force the world's most powerful military minds to confront an unbearable truth. The United States had achieved something that for generations had existed only in theory and science fiction: an invisible strike, a silent penetration, a victory without warning. And for those who witnessed its effects from the wrong side of the radar screen, January 17th, 1991 was not just the opening of a new war. It was the moment they realized the Cold War, as they understood it, was already over. For more than 40 years before that night, the Cold War had been defined by a single brutal truth. The next global conflict would be decided in the air, and whoever controlled the sky would decide the fate of nations. Both superpowers understood this with terrifying clarity. Bombers, missiles, and nuclear warheads were useless without warning, and warning depended on radar. Radar was not just a tool, it was the foundation of survival. Every strategy, every treaty, Every sleepless night in Washington and Moscow rested on the belief that no attack could ever arrive undetected. You might not be able to stop it, but you would see it coming. That belief kept the world alive. The Soviet Union, more than any other nation, had built its entire military identity around air defense. Scarred by the memory of surprise invasions and shaped by the fear of American bombers crossing vast distances, Soviet engineers and generals created what they believed was the ultimate shield. A massive, layered system of early warning radars, engagement radars, surface-to-air missiles, interceptor aircraft, and centralized command structures designed to function even under nuclear attack. This system, known collectively as the PVO, was not merely defensive. It was the backbone of Soviet power. It was the guarantee that the United States could never launch a successful first strike. As long as the shield held, the balance of terror remained intact. By the late 1970s and 1980s, this confidence seemed justified. Soviet-designed air defenses had proven deadly in real wars. During conflicts in the Middle East, American and Allied aircraft had been shot down by Soviet missiles at alarming rates. Pilots learned to fear radar-guided weapons. Western air forces adapted, but they never forgot the lesson. Flying into a Soviet-style air defense network was dangerous, expensive, and often fatal. By the time the Cold War entered its final decade, the prevailing assumption on both sides was clear. Any future war between superpowers would be brutal, slow, and visible. Radar screens would light up, missiles would launch. Escalation would be obvious. The nightmare scenario was not invisibility but overload. This was the context in which Iraq mattered. Saddam Hussein's regime had spent years building one of the most heavily defended airspaces outside the Soviet Union itself. With Soviet doctrine, Soviet missiles, and Soviet-trained advisors, Iraq's air defense network was designed to mirror the very system protecting Moscow. It was not a coincidence. For the Soviets, Iraq was a proving ground, a real-world test of their technology and philosophy against Western air power. If the shield could hold over Baghdad, it reinforced the belief that it would hold over the Soviet homeland as well. If it failed, the implications would extend far beyond the Middle East. From the American perspective, the challenge was immense. Decades of planning had shown that traditional bombing campaigns against such defenses would be costly and slow. Aircraft would be detected, pilots would be lost, missions would require waves of support, jammers, decoys, suppression aircraft, all fighting to survive long enough to strike their targets. The idea of penetrating a Soviet-style defense network cleanly, quickly, and decisively was considered unrealistic. On paper, the advantage belonged to the defender. The sky was supposed to be hostile territory, and so, on the eve of 1991, the world still believed in the old rules. That power was measured in numbers, that detection was inevitable, that even the most advanced military on Earth could not escape the basic laws of physics. Radar waves would hit an aircraft and return, screens would light up, missiles would launch, war would announce itself loudly and unmistakably. No one, outside a handful of secret facilities buried deep in the American desert, understood that those rules were already obsolete and that the next war would begin not with noise, but with silence. Deep beneath Baghdad, sealed inside a reinforced concrete bunker designed to withstand direct hits and chemical attack, Colonel Mikhail Surov stood surrounded by the quiet confidence of machines doing exactly what they were built to do. The air was cool, artificially controlled, heavy with the smell of stale cigarettes, warm electronics and ozone. Rows of radar consoles glowed softly in the darkness, their sweeping lines tracing the sky in perfect rhythm. To Surov, this room represented certainty, mathematics, physics, decades of Soviet engineering distilled into blinking lights and steady hums. Whatever entered Iraqi airspace would be seen here first. That was not hope. That was doctrine. At precisely 02:51 local time, the certainty cracked. The bunker shuddered with a dull, subterranean vibration that rolled through the floor and into Surov's boots. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was deep, unmistakable. The physical signature of something very large being destroyed somewhere above them. A second later, A status panel on the far wall flashed, and one square shifted from green to red. The Al-Taji Air Defense Sector Operations Center. Gone. Surov's head snapped toward the radar scopes instantly, reflexively, expecting to see chaos. Instead, he saw calm. The screens were clean. The sky was empty. Confusion rippled through the room. Iraqi officers leaned closer to their consoles, adjusting dials, refreshing scopes, checking power levels. There was no electronic noise, no jamming patterns, no false echoes. The radars were functioning perfectly. Another vibration struck, stronger this time, followed by a flicker in the overhead lights. Emergency power surged online, bathing the bunker in an eerie red glow. Two more indicators on the status board turned dark. Telecommunications infrastructure, then a major power relay. The strikes were not random. They were deliberate, measured, and exact. Whatever was hitting Baghdad was moving freely through defended airspace and selecting its targets with intimate knowledge. Surov seized a headset and bypassed Iraqi command channels, demanding a direct feed from the long-range radar station. His voice was sharp, controlled, professional. He asked a simple question: "What contacts do you have?" The reply came strained, almost apologetic. None. Zero. The sky was empty. Surov stared back at the scopes, willing them to contradict the report. They did not. The sweeping lines continued their motion, tracing a peaceful, untouched sky above a city that was actively being dismantled. Another series of impacts followed in quick succession, closer now, unmistakable. Surov recognized the coordinates as they appeared on the damage reports. Air Defense Headquarters, critical command nodes. The attacks were climbing the hierarchy, severing the nervous system of the entire network. Iraqi personnel began to panic. Some abandoned their stations. Others shouted into radios that no longer responded. Surov did not move. He watched the screens frozen by the sheer impossibility of what was unfolding. Every law he understood said that this could not be happening. Aircraft could be jammed, missiles could be decoyed, systems could be overwhelmed, but nothing could strike without existing. He searched instinctively for explanations. Jamming? No. Jamming left scars on radar. Electronic warfare. That created chaos, noise, confusion. This was not chaos. This was clarity. The equipment was not lying. It was reporting the truth as it perceived it. And the truth, according to billions of rubles worth of sensors, was that nothing at all was flying over Baghdad. Yet the city above them was being surgically carved apart, bunker by bunker, antenna by antenna, as if an invisible hand were reaching down from the sky. In that moment, standing in a bunker filled with the best air defense technology the Soviet Union could export, Mikhail Surov understood that he was witnessing something unprecedented. Not a failure of training, not a failure of discipline, not even a failure of equipment. This was something far worse. This was a failure of assumption. The first direct encounter with an enemy that did not announce itself, did not appear, and did not obey the rules that had governed air warfare for half a century. And as the impacts continued, silent and precise, one terrifying question began to take shape in his mind, not about Iraq, but about home. For several seconds after the last impact faded into the distance, the bunker remained unnaturally quiet. Not the disciplined silence of a command center, but the hollow absence of movement that follows a revelation too large to process. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Hands hovered above switches that no longer mattered. The machines continued to hum, loyal and indifferent, performing their function flawlessly in a world where their function had suddenly become irrelevant. Colonel Mikhail Surov removed his headset slowly, as if speed itself might shatter what little order remained, and stared at the radar screens one final time. They still showed nothing, and that, more than the explosions, terrified him. The first emotion was not fear, but disbelief hardened into something colder, a professional, almost clinical refusal to accept the implications. Soviet doctrine did not allow for this outcome. Decades of simulations, war games, intelligence estimates, and engineering assumptions all converged on a single truth. No aircraft could penetrate a modern integrated air defense system without revealing itself. Losses, yes. Attrition, certainly. But invisibility was fantasy, science fiction, and yet the evidence was undeniable. Baghdad had just been struck at the heart, and the shield had never raised its arm. The system had not been overwhelmed. It had been bypassed. As reports filtered in, fragmented and incomplete, the scale of the failure became clearer. Entire command nodes were gone, communication lines were severed with surgical precision, power distribution was collapsing in cascading waves. This was not a bombing campaign, it was decapitation, the kind of operation that only made sense if the attacker knew with absolute confidence that detection was impossible. Surov felt a tightening in his chest, not from panic, but from the dawning realization that this confidence could only come from years of testing, refinement, and quiet certainty. This was not an improvisation. This was doctrine revealed. Within hours, secure lines crackled to life as Soviet advisors across Iraq compared notes in hushed, urgent tones. Different bunkers, different sectors, same result. No radar contact, no warning, no engagement. The conclusion, though unspoken, was universal. The Americans had crossed a threshold. They had achieved what Soviet scientists had long dismissed as theoretically improbable and operationally unachievable. True radar invisibility. Not reduction, not deception, absence, a new category of warfare that rendered entire branches of military planning obsolete overnight. The reaction in Moscow would come later, filtered through layers of politics and pride, but in that bunker, the implications were already brutally clear. If this technology could neutralize a Soviet-designed defense network in Iraq, it could do the same over Eastern Europe, over strategic missile sites, over the very cities the PVO existed to protect. The balance of terror, the fragile equilibrium that had prevented nuclear war, was no longer symmetrical. One side could see, the other could strike unseen. Deterrence itself had just been rewritten. Surov understood then that this was not merely an American victory in a regional conflict. It was a psychological shock delivered straight into the nervous system of the Soviet military mind. Every general who had built their career on air defense, every engineer who had trusted in radar equations, every strategist who believed that escalation would always be visible now faced an unbearable truth. The sky could no longer be trusted. The warning might never come. The first sign of war might be silence, followed by collapse. As dawn approached and the fires above Baghdad burned unchecked, Colonel Surov did not think about Iraq or Saddam Hussein or even defeat. He thought about Moscow, about early warning stations scanning the Arctic, about crews sitting in bunkers identical to this one, confident in their screens and procedures. And for the first time in his career, he allowed himself a thought that had once been unthinkable. If war came now, they might never see it coming. The true impact of that night did not announce itself with explosions or press conferences. It spread quietly, like a crack forming deep inside a structure that still appeared solid from the outside. In the days that followed, as analysts replayed radar logs and engineers dissected every data point, a single conclusion became unavoidable. An entire era of warfare had ended without ceremony. Airspace, once defined by detection and response, had become something else entirely. The sky was no longer a barrier. It was no longer even a battlefield. It was a corridor, and the United States now controlled who could move through it unseen. Inside military institutions across the world, the shock was profound. Doctrines written over decades were suddenly outdated. Billions of dollars in radar systems, missiles, and interceptor fleets had not been defeated in combat. They had been rendered irrelevant by design. The assumption that technological parity could be achieved through incremental improvement collapsed overnight. This was not a better missile or a faster jet. It was a conceptual leap, a redefinition of visibility itself. The implication was devastating. Superiority was no longer about numbers or reaction time, but about existing outside the enemy's perception entirely. For the Soviet military establishment, already under immense economic and political strain, the psychological weight was crushing. The Cold War had always been sustained by symmetry. The belief that both sides possessed comparable tools and comparable vulnerabilities. That symmetry was now broken. The knowledge that American aircraft could penetrate a Soviet-style defense network without triggering a single alarm introduced a level of strategic uncertainty that no amount of rhetoric could mask. Deterrence depends on confidence. Confidence depends on predictability, and predictability had just been erased. Beyond the walls of command centers and intelligence briefings, the impact rippled into the broader balance of global power. Allies took note, adversaries recalculated. Nations that had once relied on layered defenses to guarantee sovereignty realized that geography and infrastructure no longer offered protection. Power had shifted from those who could defend territory to those who could bypass defense altogether. The message was unmistakable and deeply unsettling. Control no longer belonged to those who guarded borders, but to those who could ignore them. In the United States, the impact manifested differently, not as shock, but as validation. Years of secretive research, enormous budgets hidden behind black programs, and risks taken far from public scrutiny had culminated in a moment that proved their necessity. This was not just a battlefield success. It was confirmation that American innovation, when allowed to operate without constraint, could change the fundamental rules of global competition. The result was not merely dominance in a single conflict, but a technological lead so vast that it reshaped strategic thinking worldwide. History would later record that no treaty was signed that night, no declaration made, no official acknowledgement given to the full magnitude of what had occurred. And yet, in retrospect, the Cold War effectively ended in silence over Baghdad. Not with surrender or collapse, but with the quiet realization that one side had moved beyond the other's ability to see, to respond, or even to comprehend in real time. From that moment forward, every nation understood a new and unsettling truth. The future of war would belong not to those who watched the sky, but to those who could disappear into it. History often teaches us to look for endings in dramatic moments, declarations, collapses, flags being lowered, but the most decisive turning points rarely announce themselves so clearly. Sometimes an era ends not with noise, but with understanding. What happened over Baghdad was not simply a military operation, nor even a technological demonstration. It was the moment the world quietly accepted that the rules it had lived by for half a century no longer applied. The Cold War had been built on visibility, on warning, on the assumption that power would always reveal itself before it struck. That assumption died in the dark. For the United States, this was more than victory. It was proof of a national trait that had shaped its history since the earliest days. The ability to rethink problems from first principles and to invest patiently and relentlessly in ideas that others dismissed as impossible. While adversaries perfected ways to see better, America chose a different path, to not be seen at all. That choice did not merely win a war, it redefined what winning meant. Superiority was no longer about overwhelming force, but about rewriting reality itself. For the rest of the world, the lesson was sobering and permanent. Defense would never again mean safety. Detection would never again mean certainty. The sky had become asymmetric, favoring those who could operate beyond perception. From that point forward, every radar screen carried an unspoken doubt, every early warning system a silent question. What if this time nothing appears? And that is why this moment still matters today. Not because of the bombs that fell or the buildings that burned, but because of what never showed up on the screens. In a single night, invisibility became power, silence became dominance, and war, as it had been understood for generations, faded into history, unseen, unstoppable, and irreversible.